Hello, and welcome to Allensworth. Today we are having our first and hopefully one of our last virtual events. Today we would normally be having our event here in the park over in the grassy area, but due to COVID, this will be a virtual event. We will try to entertain you as we normally would if you were here in person. We do miss your faces and we hope to see you soon. Today we will start with opening prayer. We will have Miss Shayla Bell, who, if you've been here before, you've seen her several times playing her instrument. Today she will play the Black National Anthem. We will then go into our speakers. Today we have Mr. Kayinde Suwaze. He is President Emeritus at Fresno City College. He will be speaking to you today about enslavement up to Allensworth. Our second speaker will be David Jones. He portrays the Buffalo Soldier. He puts on an event every year at Sequoia National Park. He will speak to you about the Buffalo Soldiers, all of their accomplishments, and their connection to Allensworth. Our last speaker will be Gloria Piero Dyer. Gloria and her family grew up out here in Allensworth in the 50s and 60s. She also wrote a book about Allensworth, and she will speak to you today about the town of Allensworth. So for all of you who sign up to be a member of the Friends of Allensworth today, your name will go in the hat to win a $100 gift certificate that has been donated from Amazon. We actually have 5 of those. So we will choose a time, maybe at the end of the event, or if not, we will schedule another time where we will let you know who the winners are. So again, welcome, and let's get started.
And now the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
At this point, I'd like to introduce Miss Shayla Bell playing the Black National Anthem. like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Kayinde Sawazi.
Hello, I'm Kayinde Sawazi, a member of the Friends of Allensworth board, and I'm on the educational committee. And I have to say it's a real pleasure doing what I'm doing and working with our brothers and sisters at FOI. And sister, it's a real pleasure working with you. This is something I love to do, is talk about our history. And so I want to get right into that. It's most important that our young people, our children, and our community know the importance of history, because it's history that gives us the concept of the past, the present, and the future. And we as African Americans have been kept away, literally, from our historical past. Not only have we been kept away from even the African American experience, but we've been kept away from our ancient experience. So when I have the opportunity to talk about our history, I'll have to always start with the fact that we are an African people. We never want to start our history with slavery. We have a 10,000-year history. I want every time I get the opportunity, I like to tell our people that we're the first human beings on the earth. We're the first human beings to create family. We're the first human beings to create community. We're the first community people to create a concept of values, law, order. So we as African people are the oldest people on the planet. And our ancestors created the greatest civilizations that the earth has ever seen. And that includes the first civilization, Tasseti, in the Nile Valley, then ancient Black Egypt, then Kush, and even Ethiopia. The ancient word for that would be Aksum. These are the civilizations that gave us math, astronomy, writing. And the beauty of it is that our civilization was a kind of a binary civilization. So both women and men were empowered in African civilization. So when I talk about the achievements of our ancient elders, that was as much women as it was us men. And I always like to say that because Black women have a tremendous history of leadership and actually running a country. So it's not just a sidekick, but in leadership roles. And so along with Black men in this ancient time, math, astronomy, all of that was part of both Black men and Black women. In fact, one of the ancient groups is called the priestesses of Sachet. And they were the ones who laid out the temples and all of that. And so our legacy is tremendous as African people. The West African experience that we've been through, that many of us are from, places like today would be Nigeria or Cameroons, etc. Our ancient period of history would be empires, like the greatest empires in world history. One of them was the Empire of Mali. And in fact, one of the greatest, wealthiest kings of his history was the great King Mansa Musa. And I always want our children to know the importance of knowing one of our greatest Renaissance men, and that would be the great Imhotep, scholar, architect, philosopher, a medical doctor. So I want our children to know that information. This is part of our great history. It's important that we understand that not only that we had Ghana and Mali, but we had great kingdoms like Mali and the Igbo civilization and the Benin civilization and Ife kingdoms. All of these are our particular foundational civilizations. And from these civilizations, we mastered agriculture, we mastered metal technology, we mastered city planning, We mastered cotton growing. And most people don't know that, but Africans were astute in growing cotton. And so we've been growing cotton since the Nile Valley age for 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. So this is our background, and I think it's very important when we talk about our experience here in the United States and the experience here, particularly here in the Valley, that we have this knowledge for our children that they need to know, to feel great about themselves and about their ancestors. Now, when we talk about what happened to us and why we're here, we have to understand that the Europeans invented gunpowder. They didn't invent it, but they used it and made gun culture out of their use of firepower and all of that. And they perfected the gun. And that put them ahead of everybody on the planet, because they were able to conquer people from all over the world. And wherever they went, they carried on domination, destruction, and death when it comes to people of color and people that were non-Christian and non-white. So by the time we get to the 1500s, the 1600s, Europeans began to have defeated the Native Americans. And this whole land that were completely dominated by the English, the French, the Spaniards, etc., the Portuguese, etc. So by this time in Mother Africa, we were going through divisions, civil wars, internal conflicts, and then invasions by both Europeans and Arabs. And so this later left us, many of us, vulnerable, because the Europeans needed labor. They needed someone to clear the land that they had taken from the Native Americans and genocide the Native Americans. They needed someone to grow crops and expand the develop, because that's how the wealth was created. It's through cotton, sugar, tobacco, even rice. And these are the gifts. I wouldn't say gifts, but the significance of the experience of slavery, etc. This is why slavery was a need for labor and a need for our expertise as African people, because, as I said, we were metal workers, we were agricultural people, we built cities, we knew how to develop technologies in every form of horsemanship and farming and all of that. So we were a ready-made culture to enhance a gun culture, which is the one that got us here. And the significance of this event is that for 235 years, we were in a no existence situation. I would call the plantation system not a plantation, but a death culture. It was a culture of death. So we were literally worked to death. And so when I think about plantations, I think about death camps. And so we were literally worked to death for 200 and some years. Now, in that process, the idea that we weren't human beings, the idea that we didn't have a culture, all that was promoted through European scholarship, through their churches, through everything that came to define us. We were defined out of history as human beings. That's why people are still throwing bananas at us and calling us monkeys, because it was implanted in the minds of Americans that African people were not human, because they had kept the history and the knowledge that I just talked about earlier. We never saw that. That was kept from us. We didn't know we were the first inventors of writing. We didn't know that. You see, so we just think that all this is something unique to them, to the Europeans. And so by the end of by, let's say, around 1850s, 1855, you have a real conflict going on between slave labor, people who got their wealth, massive wealth from slave labor in the South, and the people who at one time were slaveholders themselves in the North. Places like New York, it was African people who cleared the land in New York that made New York possible. They found burial grounds by poor ancestors who were literally worked to death in New York, in that part of America. But by the time we get to 1860, what we have now is a conflict between free labor and slave labor. And so slavery was the key to the kingdom in terms of the wealth of the United States. And so cotton became the most valued asset for the United States. And we were the ones who picked that cotton. We were the ones who cleared the land. So by 1860, we're in a civil war. Thank God for the Civil War, because 200,000 black men joined the Union cause. 200,000 black men fought valiantly in almost sometimes suicide assignments. But we fought. Our ancestors fought because they were fighting for our women and our children, and fighting for real freedom. And so the success of our soldiers and our sailors and seamen brought the success of the Union. And Abraham Lincoln even acknowledged that when he signed the 13th Amendment, that he said that America, as we know it today, wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for the value of those black soldiers and sailors who helped the Union side win the war. Now, at the end of that war, black people, our ancestors, our African-American ancestors, wanted 5 basic things. We wanted land. We wanted so we could be self-sufficient. We wanted education for our children. Slavery destroyed much of our family units, so we wanted to restore our family unit. Our ancestors also wanted to acquire wealth. They definitely want to acquire wealth. And most important of all, like today, they wanted political power. They wanted the right to vote. They wanted the right to run for office. And so the first 20 years after the Civil War, we were almost free. We had Congress people. We had 2 senators. We had black representatives, because black men they were the only voters. The only men could vote those days. So black men, working with black women always, utilize their political power. One of the reasons we have public education today, that's due to the Union, the old Reconstruction black politicians, making sure that we had free education for our children. But what happened is that we got betrayed. And we got betrayed by this government, by the state governments, by the local, because white people, both in the North and in the South, wanted to restore power over African Americans. And so as we were building at least 70-some towns, as we were building our own community, we didn't get reparations. We didn't get anything. We barely had the clothes on our back when slavery was over. So by the time we get to the great 1876, I think it was a famous compromise where black people literally sold out to the South, and the beginning of a war on us was initiated, called lynching and burning and destroying our towns. And our farmers were one of the victims of lynching. Was a lot of our farmers and our leaders, people who were very developing for our communities. They became targets. Our black politicians. Wilmington, North Carolina is one place where they literally just invaded the city hall and just run black people out by gunpoint, and then carried on massacres in there and in Atlanta and down south. So the hope and wishes of our people for true justice failed us. And so by the time we get to and I always want to make it clear, is that we developed ourselves. It's amazing what we did coming out of slavery, that we did build our own towns. We did create our own educational systems. We did develop, thanks to the church, thanks to the Masons, thanks to the Eastern Star, we built communities. And those communities were viable. A dollar in our community amongst us went 16 to 18 times amongst Black people before it left the Black community. So when I hear about people talking to us about other groups, how successful they are, we were so successful, it brought rage, envy, and the need to dominate and control our communities and our people. And this leads us up to at the end of the 1900s. We had lost the right to vote. We had lost many of our towns had been destroyed. We were barely trying to find some resources to educate our kids. This is by 1900s. And so this is a time that we have the beginning of the Allensworth experience. And at this point of my presentation, I think that the speakers that will deal with Allensworth will give you an idea on the success of Allensworth and how it tied into what happened in the 18th and the 19th centuries with our people in the 20th century. So I want to thank my cohort in giving me this opportunity. I love to teach. I love our history. I think African people have a legacy of excellence, have a legacy that cannot be ignored. And we want our children to know this, so they will love their African foundation and their African history. And that, when I'm saying that, I'm talking about our African American experience as well. So thank you, sister. This is my side of it.
At this point, I'd like to introduce David Jones.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Trooper David Jones, and I am a Buffalo soldier. And I would first like to thank the folks here for allowing me to have the opportunity to speak upon this remarkable American history. And that I traveled throughout Northern California to make sure that this history is preserved and presented in such a way that people truly get educated and respect the accomplishments of these great men, and for all of us to share and embellish in what they did and what they were accomplished, because it was truly an outstanding feat which these men worked with and under the conditions in which they worked under. So the story goes that after the Civil War, Congress enacted a bill that allowed for these newly freed men and men that were already previously freed, but all men of color, to become officially a part of the United States military. And for that, they would be rewarded with the harshest of duties, the worst of the work, and the worst of the equipment for a period of time, but also $13 a month, 3 square meals a day, and a roof over their head. And that was a whole lot better than the circumstances in which they were coming out of and had opportunities afforded to them. So it was not such a bad deal for these men to come out and prove that they were more than worthy to be citizens of this state, and that they deserved the same equal opportunities and rights of others that they also fought and died for during the Civil War. So as it goes, the Western frontier was the new untamed frontier that needed law enforcement and new development, and that's what was going on, is that everyone was headed west. And the story it goes, or the saying goes, that go west, young man, and seek your fame and your fortune. Well, there was lots of that to do, and lots of that to be had. And these men, Congress again enacted the bill that allowed them to be officially a part of the United States military, which before they were volunteers. But now you have 4 regiments. You would have the 9th Cavalry and the 10th Cavalry, and you'd have the 24th and the 25th Infantry. And they would go on throughout history to do some pretty remarkable things that, again, would take more time to talk about than I'm allotted here at this time. So I encourage you to follow us and follow me and follow this history and Google it and read some more about it and learn, because it's absolutely tremendous. But these men would head out west to be the law enforcement, and they would have to do a lot of things that, as we look back on the 21st century, with this opinion that we have, of things that would, necessarily would not want to have to do, but because of progress, which nothing stops progress. Progress is coming whether with or without you. And based on that, these men were tremendous at their job. They were able to accomplish many things. Some of their tasks would have been to protect and provide service for the folks that were coming out to the western frontier. They protected the railroad workers as they laid the tracks. They protected the railroad trains as they pursued and proceeded down the railroad lines. Wagons, mail, strung telegraph wires, built a lot of the forts, surveyed a lot of the roads, found a lot of the watering holes to support all of this new progression that was coming westward. So they were the first of the first to be out in the land, searching and scouring the land to find the best routes to protect people for their livelihoods, and also enforcing the laws of the United States government that was just newly founded as we had all been brought together after the Civil War. But these men would go on to have a tremendous amount of accomplishments throughout the history of this country. And that is what is not known a great deal about, because it is not taught in your local schools and in the curriculums. And it's pretty sad that we're at that point in the 21st century that we don't understand what the real truth is about some of this history and the accomplishments of some of these great men. Three of them off the top of my head that we can talk about would be the first West Point graduate, which was Henry Osan Flipper. He was the very first West Point graduate, although there were others who preceded him but did not graduate because of, let's say, some unfavorable circumstances that would not allow them to fulfill that full requirement to get their degree and graduate. And that was a challenge that a lot of men of color had during that particular era of time, in which they weren't overly accepted, which was another remarkable aspect about these men, that they were not just disliked because of the color of their skin, they were disliked because of the politics and the color of their uniform. A Union blue did not sit well in the southern parts of the world and people who were Southern sympathizers. So not only did they disrespect and not have any fondness for these men of color, they also disagreed with the politics that goes behind the uniform in which these men were serving and working up under. So many different variables as history is being told in its light that we never probably really recognized at that time. But understand, they were disliked for many reasons. And in spite of that, these men were successful in accomplishing what their job was and their tasks were to accomplish those goals, to again provide the level of service and protection that the Western frontier was desperately in need of. And so they played a major role in this development of the Western frontier. And they would go on to do many major things. And again, the second West Point graduate would have been John Hanks Alexander, who was another individual of remarkable status, who would die at a young age. He would die actually by the age of 31, I believe it was. And so did not yet have the ability to fulfill his destiny as the second graduate of West Point Academy as a black man. The third, which is perhaps one of the most remarkable, which would have been Colonel Young. Colonel Charles Young, he is the epitome of a role model of excellent example of excellence, okay? Not a single thing in his background that could flaw this man. He was just absolutely exquisite. He was a well-educated man, born into slavery, but his mother and his father would cross the Ohio River and give him the opportunity to live in more of a free society and more opportunities for education, which, if you understand the whole history, it was illegal to educate Africans at that time, or African Americans at that time, and so they were not taught. They were basically ignorant individuals, illiterate, because of the fact that they were not taught. But this man was able to accomplish within 6 years, at least 6 years, he would learn everything that you would need to learn in a curriculum to graduate high school, to graduate college, to go on to be a professor. He is a musical composer, a poet, an engineer, scholar, all of these things. He would speak 6 different languages by the time he was 21 years old, and he would go on to teach and be a professor at the same age. Remarkable when you think about that, of how short of a period of time he was able to learn, and learn well, right, in order for him to progress further in his advancement for the American dream, right, the pursuit of the American dream, in which he did. Colonel Young would do some amazing things and mentor some amazing people. And he would have to overcome some very, very difficult obstacles because, again, the sign of the times were that we were not, as African Americans and men of color, going to be treated fairly within this society and within this system. And we were going to have to earn every inch of the way and fight and scratch for every inch of respect that we so desperately deserved and so willingly deserved. And Colonel Young, again, was perhaps one of the most remarkable examples of that. He would go on to fight in different campaigns throughout his career, become one of the very first park rangers and superintendents here in California, which is, again, my backyard and a place that I'm happy to be and live and call home and represent this story because there's some remarkable Buffalo Soldier history right here in California. And so as it would go, he would be one of the very first black and only black superintendents of the National Park Service at that time, where his job was to protect and to build and progress the National Park Service's mission of protecting these wonderful outdoor environments. And he would be an individual who would accomplish multiple things in one summer that was not accomplished by other military folks prior to his service there. And although he would only serve one summer in Sequoia National Forest in Yosemite, he would make a major everlasting impact upon that structure and that place. And for that, there is a tree named after him, which every year I go back to and do our dedication and pay my personal respects to such a wonderful man, and one that I can truly look back of and see as a remarkable role model for all of us to realize of what can be accomplished when one rises above the adversity that is laid before you, and realizing that where you come from is a great empowerment to understand where you're going. And so for that, this history has been tremendous for me and allowed me to do such things. And there would be other great men that would come along. There would be 18 Medal of Honor winners that the Buffalo Soldiers would have be recognized by the United States government, and perhaps even more had the fairness been what it should have been. And these men would have one of the longest durations of military service out of any regiment in the entire military, which would go from 1866 onward into 1951, where some of the very last Buffalo Soldiers, as we would call them and we would see them and recognize them for, would fight in Korea. And so, again, it would take me a great deal more time and to tell you some more wonderful stories of these men. And one of them in particular that is really close to what we're doing here today is Allensworth. And Colonel Allensworth was a Buffalo Soldier. He was a chaplain. And that was another responsibility that the United States military put upon these regiments, which they knew were uneducated, and they wanted to educate them in the basic formalities and formal education so that they could be able to do their job and perform their task and understand what was asked of them. And so each regiment would have been assigned a chaplain. And these chaplains would be responsible for their spiritual well-being, but also their educational well-being. And Colonel Allensworth was one of those individuals who was with the 24th Infantry, I believe it was, and he would play a major role in that. And as he would go to establish the township that he did here in California, which was just one remarkable feat for him to be able to do, and I think it's really kind of sad that we've not tried to repeat that, but our time is coming. But needless to say, I would say that his accomplishments were just as amazing as Colonel Young's, and I think that it is to be recognized as such that we pay our respects to this man and what he did. And he would recruit from his pool of Buffalo Soldiers that he was in charge and responsible for, as he was a lieutenant colonel. And so there would be many Buffalo Soldiers who would make their home there in Allensworth. And right offhand, I don't have the names, but I know that Sasha Briscoe has the names on her, and I'm a little ill prepared for that, so I apologize. But we have those names, and we're working on that gravesite now to bring it back to standard, to bring it up to par, and to figure out ways to make it sustainable. So one quick plug that I'll put on here is adopt a grave, people. Adopt a grave. It doesn't take much money. These men worked for $18 in pennies and change, $13 a month, as I've said. But for $18.66 a month, we can make some big changes out here at Allensworth and not wait for the government and anybody else to do something for us that we can do ourselves. So I just thought I'd throw that out there, because that is one of my new goals in life, is to make sure that I find a support for this wonderful establishment and this historical establishment. And it should no way and lightly be left to go to the wayside. It's a wonderful piece of history. I'm glad to be a part of it, and I thank you again for having me. And I hope that down the road that more people will engage in this conversation and come and see me and some of the other things that I offer, and some of the other Buffalo Soldier groups that are out there as well. There's a chapter that goes nationwide. I am a lifetime member of the national organization, so I represent these men wherever I go and whatever I do. And so I hope you appreciate just a small bit of what I could offer you as far as a little bit of information about what a Buffalo Soldier is. And just so that you know and we're clear, they got the name a couple of different ways. One way was during a winter campaign, when covered with snow and dressed in a buffalo hide and the snow upon our dark-skinned face, our complexion resembled that of that American buffalo. The other has to do with the ability to engage in combat. That when a buffalo is cornered, he will turn and he will fight to the death. And so does the herd. The herd will protect the weakest of their herd, and they will surround it, and they will defend it with all of their might. And when they would encounter these Buffalo Soldiers, these black men, they ran into the same type of ferocity and the same type of courage was clearly eminent with these men, that these men were not going to turn tail and run, even when the odds were against them, as they were constantly outnumbered out there on the frontier and in the plains. And again, it was in their backyard in which these engagements happened, so they definitely had the upper hand in regards to that. But these men would earn the respect of everyone, not just Native Americans, but soon they would earn the same respect of those white settlers that did not wish upon them to be in the same areas of them, as they would come and protect the towns. They would come and save the towns from wildfires and everything else, and later on in history, they would become some of the very most experienced combat troops by the 1890s that the United States military ever even had. They made up about 20% of the military at that time, and again, remarkable skills that these men were called upon to do some of the, let's say, the most challenging of duties. These men would be called upon usually first because they had that kind of ability. And so again, so many more things that I could tell you, so many more stories that I could share with you, so many personal stories as far as different individuals who have accomplished so much, and what it means to me to be a part of that and to represent that history. So again, I thank you for the opportunity to be here today to tell you just a little bit about the Buffalo Soldiers. And if you keep an eye out for me, I'm out there on Facebook. Again, this is Trooper David Jones, and I'm out there as Horse Soldier on Facebook, and you can find me and all the different things. And we're looking to make 2021 a big spectacular year, seeing how 2020 is kind of taking a dump on all of us. And I hope everybody does well and comes out of 2020 smiling and healthy, and that we do bigger and better things for 2021, and we continue to progress with our history and empower everyone with this knowledge, because it's truly an American story. Thank you very much, and good evening.
Also in the program today, we have Haziel Israel. He will portray Colonel Allen Allensworth.
Where am I at? We are in Allensworth, California. So what I'm going to get into now is I'm going to get into the history of Colonel Allen Allensworth, who was one of the founders of this town. He's actually the brother who the town was named after. I don't have much time, so I'm gonna get right to it. So the town of Allensworth was actually the first town in California to be founded, incorporated, and inhabited by African Americans, black people. So the Colonel Allen Allensworth, he was born as Allen in slavery, okay? But he was actually born a free man, but he was sold as a slave and given as a gift to his slave master. Literally, just like how people give Christmas gifts, he was given as a gift to his slave master. And his mother wanted him to learn how to read because she wanted a better future for him. And so what she had him do was play a game with his slave master. Now, one thing that you should know, if you don't know, during that time, it wasn't lawful for black people to read. We weren't allowed to read and write. It was against the law for us to learn how to read. But his mother didn't stop at that. And so his mother had him play a game with him. And that game was called school, where his slave master was the teacher and he was the student. They were around the same age, they were young. And so he taught him how to read. Well, once his slave master's parents found out, they sold him and his mother to separate plantations. And so Allen, he really lived the harshness and the cruelty of slavery, and he did not like it. So for that reason, he ran away. Not once, not twice, but 3 times he attempted to run away. You know, they talk about escaping the plantation. That's what this brother was all about, escaping the plantation. Now, the second time he attempted to run away, he was actually caught, and they took him down to Louisiana, and he was sold off of auction blocks. Literally, sold off of an auction block. Like how you go to an auction today to buy a car, he was sold off of an auction block to a man down in Louisiana who took him and made him his jockey, you know, because he was the man raced horses. And so Allen was racing horses, and he was so good of a jockey, he actually raced his master's best horse. Now, some people would say, you're a horse jockey, you know, at least you ain't out picking cotton. No, you gotta understand, he was still a slave. He was still another man's property, and he didn't like that. So what the brother did was, he staged another runaway. And the way that he did it, it was very, very creative. He took advantage of the Civil War that was going on. You had the Union Army at the north and the Confederates down at the south. And he had a horse race that was taking place up in Kentucky. And the Union Army was having drills, and the brother jumped in the ranks. And he started marching with them. And they marched and marched and marched and marched right past his master's house, where his master was staying at. And he marched to freedom. Think about that. The brother jumped in the ranks and marched to freedom. So he served in the army for a short time before enlisting into the United States Navy. Now, at that time, black people could only serve as stewards or cooks. And so he served as a steward. He actually became the chief steward over a gunship in the United States Navy, and he served in the Navy for 2 years. After he got out of the Navy, the time was somewhere around 1865, 1866, 1867, somewhere around there. The Emancipation Proclamation had already been passed by President Abraham Lincoln, and which freed the slaves, so to speak. And so he actually reconnected with his mother, and he reconnected with his brother. And him and his brother, they were entrepreneurs, fresh out of slavery, but they had an entrepreneurial mind. And so him and his brother, they started a business. They actually started 2 businesses, 2 successful restaurant businesses on 2 sides of town in Louisville, Kentucky. And those restaurants were so successful that they were actually able to sell them for a profit. So let's recap for a second now. So you got a runaway slave, okay? Then he escapes using the army. Then he joins the Navy. And after he gets out of the Navy, he becomes a successful entrepreneur. But the story doesn't stop there. After they sell the restaurants, he gets involved in the church. And the church members, they actually wanted him to become the pastor of the church. But he had never attended any formalized schooling. And so he didn't feel like he fit the criteria of becoming a pastor. So what he did was he told him, look, I'm gonna go to school. He went to a Baptist theological school, and once he got his degree, he came back and became the pastor of that church. From there, he gets involved into politics. He was elected as a Kentucky state delegate, and he actually attended the Republican National Convention. Now, let's think about this for a second. Right now, you look at black folks, everybody votes Democrat. Well, back then, black folks voted Republican. Look it up. Because the Republican Party was the party that actually, I guess, how do you say, they were the ones that were working with black folks during that time. So he attends the Republican National Convention, and somewhere along the line, he's approached by a Buffalo soldier. And the Buffalo soldier shared with him the plights of black soldiers in the army, and the fact that there were literally very few to none black chaplains. So what he did was he wrote a letter to the chief of the army, and what he did, and that letter actually ended up reaching the president of the United States, who was Grover Cleveland at the time. And so the president appointed Allen as a captain in the United States Army. He was one of 2 black chaplains in the entire army. The brother rises up through the ranks until he reached the rank of lieutenant colonel. That was the highest rank of any black man ever in the history of the United States Army at that time. But his story didn't stop there. He serves, he retires. Him and his wife Josephine and their 2 daughters, they move on out to Los Angeles, California, because during that time, a lot of black people, they were moving away from the South due to racism, bigotry, and oppression, to come to the West Coast. They felt that they felt that out west the racism would not be as bad as it was down south. But boy, was he surprised, because racism still existed in California. It was just covert. You see, in the South, they had signs that would say, no coloreds allowed. But in California, there were no signs, but you understood that no coloreds were allowed. And so when the colonel got over here to California, Los Angeles, he experienced racism, and he didn't like it. And so he was inspired by Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, who were both debating on different ways that black folks could thrive during this Reconstruction era. And so he got together with 5 brothers at his church. They put their coins together, and they said, you know what, we're gonna build a town. Because what they wanted to do was they wanted to build a town where they wouldn't have to deal with racism. They wanted to build a town, a community where they wouldn't have to deal with bigotry, oppression, Jim Crow laws. That's what they wanted. And this wasn't new, because you had the Black Wall Street of Tulsa, right? You had Greenwood, you had Rosewood down in Florida, you had Mound City. There were other towns, other people that were doing it, but he wanted to do it out here in California. So they got their money together and they started looking for land. Now the problem was, no one wanted to sell to black people during that time. Nobody wanted to, we talk about redlining today. Nobody wanted to sell land to black people during that time. So they searched far and wide looking for land until they came across a small town in Central California by the name of Salinas, California. The land was owned by the Pacific Farming Company, and they agreed to sell them a portion of land, and that portion of land, it ended up growing to about 900 acres. Yeah, I said it, 900 acres of land that they bought over a period of time. And so when the town, when they bought the land, they incorporated the town and they named it after the Colonel Allen Allensworth. They named it Allensworth, California. This was like the Black Wall Street of the West. In its heyday, there were over 300 residents that lived in this town in its heyday. and there was everything you could imagine. 2 general stores, a drugstore, a pharmacy. They had hotels, they had restaurants, transportation businesses, a train station, a school, a church. And a train station, they would bring the houses in on a train, if you can imagine that. And not only that, the colonel's biggest idea that he had was inspired by a man by the name of Booker T. Washington, who had founded the Tuskegee Institute. And what the colonel wanted to do was he wanted to build the Tuskegee of the West, a college, a black college, a HBCU to California. That was his plan. And so what he would do is he would go around in towns in California and other areas, towns where black people were facing racism, they were facing oppression, where they were facing Jim Crow, and he would tell those oppressed black people, look, you don't have to deal with the oppression where you're at. Come with me to Allensworth. Come with me to a town where you don't have to deal with that, where everywhere you look is black people, it's people that look just like you. And you can buy land and start a family. And with that college that he would have built here, it would have forever changed the landscape of Central California. But unfortunately, on one of his recruiting trips, his last recruiting trip, down in Monrovia, California, which was a very racist town. He had stepped off of a streetcar and he was ran over by 2 motorcyclists. They say that he was ran over twice. When you really look at the history, he was murdered. They murdered that man. He was ran over twice. And so after this takes place, that kills the college deal. The Pacific Farming Company, they reneged on the water rights deal that they gave the colonel and the other founders of the town with the land. They reneged on that, and they allowed farmers local farmers, not residents of the town, to cross drill into the groundwater, sucking all of the water out. The water levels got so low, arsenic could be found in it, and arsenic is poisonous. And so without water, people could no longer farm. Look at this right now. You see how brown it is? Without water, nobody could farm. So people began to leave the town in droves. Now there was some that remained. But ultimately people left the town in droves. And so I'd say in the 70s, that's when they decided to make this place a historic state park. And so that's the history of the town of Allensworth. Until we meet again, talk to you guys later.
At this point, I would like to introduce Gloria Piero Dyer.
My name is Gloria Piero Dyer, and I had the good fortune to grow up in Allensworth, California. My family moved there in 1953, so I grew up there for most of my life as a child. I was from a very large family. In fact, there were 16 of us in all. By the time we moved out there, some of the older ones were already out of elementary school and so on. But quite a few of us went to the Allensworth Grammar School, which was the name of the school at that time. They changed it later on, many years later, to Allensworth Elementary School. But in any case, the school was an elementary school that went grades 1 through 8. There was no kindergarten. So when I started school there, I started in first grade. Mr. Finley was my teacher. The school had 2 rooms, and the lower grades were in the rooms that were to your left when you face the school, and the upper grades 4 through 8 were to your right. Sometimes we'd be down to 1 teacher if the attendance was not enough to warrant 2, I suppose. But anyway, if we had 1 teacher, then we'd all be in 1 room. When it was like that, the teacher would have some of the upper grades students to go over and help the younger ones. And I remember when I was like in 7th or 8th grade, I would go and teach the first graders their alphabet and help them to learn how to read, which was, I guess, good preparation because I later became a teacher myself. But anyway, a little bit about life in Allensworth and the school experience. Besides the, as I was talking about, we had the 2 rooms, the desks in them, interestingly enough, were like the desks that you would see in something like Little House on the Prairie, where the front of one desk would have a seat on it that would be the child in front of that child would be sitting on that seat. So the desks were kind of interconnected in that way. We had a bookmobile that would come out from the county every 2 weeks, and we could check out books. And this was a very exciting time for us because we had extra books to read. And if you finished all of your books before the 2 weeks were up, you would find somebody else in the class who had a book that they had checked out that you wanted to read, and you switch books and things like that. The school events were Halloween party, Christmas party, and school closing. Those were the main events. For the Halloween party, we would have games like pin the tail on the donkey. We would have apple bobbing, where there'd be a tub of water with apples in it, and you'd have to try to push an apple to the side with your mouth and not use your hands and get it. When I think of all the hygienic aspects of that whole game, I'm sure by now the school system nowadays would say, what in the world? We'd be in all kinds of trouble if we did that kind of thing. All that saliva, I'm sure, in that water. But anyway, it was a lot of fun. The parents would bring food such as popcorn balls, cookies, and punch, and so on. And we had a great time for the Halloween party. Also, the Christmas party would be held at the end of the school season, just before the Christmas vacation started. And the whole community would come. We would have a big Christmas tree that we children had decorated using paper, snowflakes, and chains, colorful paper chains that we would make. And we would draw names so that everybody would be getting a gift, and you would buy a gift for whosever name you had drawn. And so when we came together that evening, we would have a wonderful time with Christmas carols, the gifts, the good food, and just having a good time. And sometimes we'd even have a movie with it. We also would have a school closing at the end of the school year. This was a good exercise for the children in public speaking. Every child would be giving something to recite, either a poem or maybe an essay or something like that. And we would also have a couple of plays. There would be one for the lower grades. So the children in the lower grades would have something that they did in costumes that was, on their level. And then there would be the main play, which would be put on by the children from the upper grades. And again, we would have our set and props and everything all made, and we would have our costumes on, and we'd get up there and do a play, and our parents would be there watching and be very proud of us. Oh yeah, and one other thing, for the end of school, we'd have the graduation of the 8th graders. And the 8th graders would march in to the piano playing God of Our Fathers. And I remember when I was in 4th grade, I was once asked to play the march because I'd watched the teacher playing it, and I had taught myself how to play it. So they had me play it. And so I did pretty well until I got almost to the end, and I almost froze from stage fright when I realized what I was doing in front of the whole community. But anyway, so we would have the graduation, and that was, again, a very nice time. Parents would be there and be very proud of all of us children, and it was a very good experience. Some of the another thing we would also have is an Easter egg hunt and party. At Easter, we would make little Easter baskets out of milk cartons and crepe paper, and we'd have them all decorated really pretty. And the teacher would give us this little green grass to put in it, and the teacher would put jelly beans and other kinds of candy in there, chocolate bunnies or whatever. And then the parents would come, and everybody would have colored eggs at home and would bring the eggs. Everybody would bring a dozen or so of eggs that we had dyed or decorated. And the parents would hide them, and then we'd go out and hunt eggs in our little baskets and what have you. And whoever found the most eggs would get a prize. There would also be a big goose egg, an egg that was bigger than all the rest, and whoever found that egg would get a prize as well. So that was a lot of fun for us. As far as community events, some of the things that went on in the community were, there was a Baptist church, and in fact there was also at one point there was a Seventh-day Adventist church, and the Baptist church was still operating. The Seventh-day Adventist church was closed for many years, but the Baptist church, we were not members of that church, but we would still go back to Bakersfield for our Church of God church that we came from. But anyway, sometimes someone in the community would pass away, and so the school children would be allowed to go to their funeral. So I remember going to the Baptist church to some of the funerals, and one in particular was a lady named Miss Mary. And they said, in my little mind when I was 7 or 8 years old, they said she had gone fishing and had eaten bananas before she went, and then after she came from fishing, she died. So for many years I thought, is there some connection between going fishing and eating bananas and dying? So you know how kids think. But anyway, I remember that funeral. Also, the Reverend Clark was up there, and he would be preaching the funeral. I go to prepare a place for you, and so on and so on. But one of the biggest things I remember is he had a big wad of chewing tobacco in his jaw. And he kept it there the whole time he'd be preaching. So I thought that was very interesting as a child, you know. So those were some of the things that went on in the community. Also, there's the church it's still there. It's a little white building. I don't remember now what it's being used for now, but later on, the Church of God bought it from the Seventh-day Adventists, and so my family went to church there for several years. And in fact, when I was a senior in high school, I would teach children's church or children's Sunday school at that church. So that was something we did. Also, there was a store, a general store operated by the Bonte family during the 1950s and early 60s too, I think. And we would go there and buy popsicles and candy and gum and things like that. And so that was fun. That store had an old-fashioned gas pump that was the kind that had a glass. It looked like a huge, big glass jar at the top of it, almost, it looked like. And you could see the gas in there kind of going around as it was being pumped into the car. We would have voting. And this, again, was done in the cafeteria. Again, I'm sorry that building is no longer there. But the parents would come down, and it would be during school. And sometimes we'd be eating in the cafeteria, and we'd see the parents coming in and out, and going into the voting booths. that were set up in the cafeteria and voting. The town had a small well, which was located on the north side of the school grounds, but it served no more than about 20 houses. The other residents where the water did not reach had to haul water. My dad had a farm and many cows and other livestock, so we had to haul water from the town well for our livestock as well as household use. We had a big truck and used 100-gallon barrels, which we would fill up and drive back to the farm. However, in 1964, my family had our own well dug by a man who had a well drilling service, and he was named Mr. Colquitt. He and my father became friends, and this man, in his generosity, decided to drill a well free in Allensworth, large enough to service the whole town. So that's how Allensworth got a bigger well in the 1964s. By the way, in the 1960s, I would say. By the way, my father was Jefferson Piero, and he worked very hard to get Allensworth named as part of the California State Park system. He and others worked for that. I grew up on a farm. We had a large family. Again, there were 16 of us. We didn't all live at the same time because some of the older ones were already grown and gone and married by the time some of the young ones were grown. But there'd still be maybe 10 or 12 of us out there. We had cows, which we would milk. We had pigs and chickens. We had turkeys. We had rabbits. We had a huge garden. We would raise most of our food. We raised tomatoes and okra and greens and potatoes and yams, and we always had a super abundance of food. We had a huge freezer that was always full of meat. My dad would slaughter a beef or a hog, several times a year, and in between he'd kill chickens, and we would have to pluck them, dip them in hot water and pull the feathers off. So we really grew up knowing what it was like to live on an old-fashioned farm. We also would churn our own butter. We'd milk the cows, and then we'd set some milk aside for a couple of days that we would let the cream rise on, and skim the cream off and keep the cream over here until we had enough to put into the churn to churn butter. And then we had a churn that, first we had a crank churn like that, and then somewhere along the line that one broke, so my parents got one that was like this. And you'd be going like this, and it had it had like a stick thing, and it was at the bottom of it was crossed like that. Okay, yeah, some of you probably have seen this. And you would be churning like this. Well, I was a kid who loved to read, and I thought churning butter was boring, so I'd be reading. I'd have a book in one hand, reading it, and churning with the other until the butter was done. So those were some of the things, some of the experiences that I had growing up in Allensworth. I would say that there is a great deal of significance to that experience, the unusual experience of having grown up in a town that was originally all Black. In the late 1950s, some more people moved in who were like, there were several white families who moved in and Hispanic families, but the majority were always Black. But we all got along, so that was a good thing. But I will say that because it was a town where everybody who was basically in authority was Black, the teachers were always Black in the era when I went there. The pastor, of the church down there, he was Black. And even when we opened our church, the pastor was Black. The people who owned the grocery store were Black. So the people who were doing things in the town, the school board, they were all Black people. So I think when you grow up in an environment like that, you do feel affirmed in your Blackness, and because you're really not the minority. And that's an experience a lot of people never have. the experience of not feeling like a minority. So I think that there was a great deal of benefit in that, and also knowing that Black people had actually built the town themselves. It wasn't like somebody else had built it and we just kind of gradually took it over. No, Black people actually had built the school, had built the churches, had built the stores, and whatever was there, the Black people had actually done it themselves. So I think that in growing up in an environment like that, one tends to acquire a sense of being able to do things. And again, my father was a farmer, so he owned his own land. He didn't work for some of the big farmers around there, which a lot of people did, but my dad didn't. He said, I'm having my own farm. And that's what we had, 63 acres with animals and crops growing and all of this. And again, he was an entrepreneur. So you grew up with the feeling that you can actually do things on your own. You don't have to wait for somebody to create something and then give you a job. You can actually get out and create something on your own. So I think there was a great deal of benefit in having grown up in that environment. I also think about the relevance of towns like Allensworth. As many of you know, the history of Allensworth, it was started in 1908 by Colonel Allensworth, who at the time of his retirement in, I believe it was 1906 or thereabouts, was the highest ranking African American in the military of the United States. And he had been born in 1842 as a slave. And yet he had risen through and he was self-educated originally, and he went on to go to through the school system and college and so on, was able to get his doctorate and became a chaplain. And he was over the regiment where the Buffalo soldiers were. And it was inspiring. The very story of him was inspiring to know that he had started this town. And we would see his picture, by the way, all the time on the wall in the school. His picture and his wife's picture were up there. We'd see them every day when we were in school. So we knew these were the Black people who had founded this town. So knowing that somebody could come from slavery and build an entire town was astonishing when you think about it. As children, we didn't grasp the full significance of it, but over the years, when we saw, as we learned more about the history of Black people in the United States, we came to appreciate what it took for them to do what they had done. Allensworth was created during an era when Black people were being severely persecuted in the early 1900s, I'd say from the 1800s on to the 1920s, for example. The Ku Klux Klan, after the end of Reconstruction, when the Union troops were moved from the South, and the Ku Klux Klan rose and was persecuting people, Black people, terribly. Lynchings were common. This went on for decades. It was written about by Ida B. Wells, if you ever want to look that up. But Black people were lynched a lot. Many of them lived in fear. They were denied equality of educational opportunity. Many times they were denied good jobs. Even as time went on, and California was not as bad as the South, but it had its own levels of discrimination, and we call that in those days de facto segregation. So all of this, when you consider it and why Allensworth was started and how it was like a city of refuge, like other cities that were started by Black people in that era, it was a place where Black people could be affirmed. And I think even today, that concept is relevant. I was reading the other day about a town that is being started in Georgia that is going to be named Freedom. And I thought that was very interesting. And it's being started by Black people. So that concept is not dead. And I can just imagine how affirming that will be. Not that we will segregate ourselves. We don't want segregation. I say, if we have Black towns, anybody is welcome, as long as they're to affirm and not disaffirm us as Black people and our culture. So anyway, I think it has relevance on a number of levels. I would say even if you're not founding a town per se, you can use that same concept in a Black community. I'll give you an example. There's a term called gentrification, which has been happening all over the place. And this is a situation wherein you have, and I've seen it right here in Sacramento, because I've lived here for many decades. You have a situation where you have white people living over here in maybe a nice middle class area. Black people start moving in there. White people move out. That's called white flight. And black people, more and more black people move in there. And the neighborhood goes down, the stores close, the quality of the schools isn't good. And the black people who are the professionals leave and they move to the white suburbs and so on. And so then that neighborhood is considered an impoverished neighborhood and undesirable and so on. But what will happen is, ironically enough, something called gentrification. Now, gentrification is where you have white people who decide, hey, you know what? This place is not all that bad. Look where it's located. It's near the downtown. It has this, it has that. It's near the river. Why don't we move back over there, buy properties really, really cheap, because the suburbs by now have gotten really expensive. Go over there, a bunch of us, we buy houses really, really cheap, fix them up. Pretty soon the neighborhood is looking nice. Pretty soon more and more white people move back over there. Pretty soon the property values are way up. Businesses move in there. And guess what? Black people can't even afford to move back to the places they moved out of, okay? So, so if black people would think in terms of, instead of following other people around so much, and then when they move away, let everything go down, just say, hey, we don't have to let everything go down just because other people moved away from us. To get away from us really is why they move out. Let us build stores. Let us keep the neighborhood up. Let us build new homes here. Let us have a neighborhood government type of thing, self-governance, where we can make this a very desirable place to live and a place that affirms us in our African American culture. So I say that that principle has generalizability on many levels. And I think that Allensworth is emblematic of what black people can do for themselves when they put their minds to it. Thank you very much.
So for those of you who are not aware, we are the Friends of Allensworth. We are a 501c3 nonprofit association. We work in partnership with California State Parks regarding Allensworth. We are actively looking for members, volunteers. We need docents. Your membership is important because it increases our revenue, and we use that money to make sure that we keep the history of this park alive, and in the forefront for future generations. We are also doing a GoFundMe right now. There are many needs in the park. We are going after, we have a campground in the background here. It is dry camping. So we want to introduce electricity and water to the camping to make it the experience for the camper much better than it is at the moment. We are also doing GoFundMe. We are looking to add solar panels so that we can run electricity to all of the buildings to make it more comfortable for our docents.
see the terrible condition of the park. And what we got right now, we got brothers. We about to have brothers on weed whackers. And then we're gonna have brothers coming behind with rakes. So right now we out here organizing. We got about 14, maybe 15 brothers. And yeah, we're gonna get this. We're gonna honor our ancestors right, man. We're gonna get this thing right. So this is how it's looking right now. This is how our ancestors are being honored. This should upset you. This should infuriate you. So, like I said, we got the brothers out here, and we're gonna get it done. I'm just gonna walk over here to one of these sites and just show you what I'm talking about. This is a grave site for one of the founders or one of the residents of the town of Allensworth. This is what their grave site looked like. They started Black Wall Street, and this is how it's looking. This should infuriate you, family. This should infuriate you. This should infuriate you. This should infuriate you. This makes me upset when you look at this. This is how their grave sites are being honored right now. Should infuriate you. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go up here. We're gonna start at the back. We're gonna start at the back and bring ourselves up to the front. This is how their grave sites are looking. So we're gonna get this thing cleaned up today. Hannah Pearson. Look at this fence. We're gonna get this thing right.
I have some information. I know you guys are doing some fundraisers down the road to put some markers on the grave sites. I have some information for you.
You made a copy of it.
Based on some studies done in the past, we don't know exactly who's here or where they are. We have some identified, but then I have a list that I'm going to give you of the people we believe are buried here. So as you guys go around and do your fundraisers and come up with ways to establish markers, you have some names.
Wow.
Historical.
Okay.
How many names do you have on the list?
43 names on this list. I've seen a list with less than that, but I think this is the most comprehensive list at this point. So.
Thank you.
All right. So, as we mentioned, I know somebody was going to bring a tractor out from LA. Is that person here? No. Okay.
Hi, Sasha.
Hey, Sasha, you're here. Okay. As you can imagine, seeing what you see now, a tractor here will definitely create some problems. Yeah. The cemetery goes all the way down to the trees. There's another road back that way. So this cemetery goes all the way down. The portion that was used in the past goes to the side.
Got it.
So, but the actual land dedicated to the cemetery goes all the way. It's approximately 5 acres. So it goes all the way down to the trees. So,
okay, and
just FYI.
Okay, also currently with the cemetery, the county has jurisdiction over it, but it's in the process of being transferred from the county to the Allensworth Community Services District, Water District. Sherry Hunter is the chair, the president of the Water District.
It's going to the Friends of Allensworth first.
Yeah, the Friends of Allensworth is holding it until LAVCO finishes and it's transferred over into the Water District. So what you're doing is really the onset of what needs to continuously happen so this comes alive. And our prayer and goal is that this historical cemetery can be a part of California, a California historical landmark, and also with the National Registry, and hopefully connected with the historical park, because the descendants from that town, the park, are buried here, many of them.
Yeah, if you look, you go back and forth, there are some headstones with dates and stuff like that. mind-boggling when you look at that.
Right, so these crosses that you see, most of them are the ones that my aunt Sheila put up like maybe about 8 or so years ago. Some of them though are even older than that, and what happens is, as you'll see, like kind of pieces of wood sticking up. There was a cross there, and you know, the time and everything like that, the wind hits it, something brushes against it, and it starts to fall apart. So if you see a piece of wood on the ground, it's almost certainly something that used to be a cross, you know. So as best you can, try not to just like rake them up and throw them away. Try to keep them more or less where they are on the ground, and kind of clean around the area. And if you have to pick it up and clean and then put it back down or something like that, and then later on we can come and replace the crosses again, which is what my aunt did. And kind of any of those places where there's wood, we'll know that a cross is supposed to go.
All right, family, we about to get this going, get this cemetery cleanup going.
When the people that owning that property purchased that property, this was all desolate out here.
Right.
They came out and took down all the fences. See, there was a fence. You see, there's a piece right here. See the
Yes.
post? Just one post left right there.
That one post.
And just one post. And that continued just like this, all the way down to the road, to the main road.
All the way where the trees at?
Yeah.
Wow.
So they stole all of that, took down all of this here. They couldn't get to the pipes yet, to the posts, but they took the wire itself, the chain link fence. They took that down. They took this all the way down to some of the posts with it.
How long ago was this?
5-6 years ago.
Wow.
Okay, can you repeat the story about the farmers growing crops on top of the cemetery?
Our understanding is Jack Phillips, who owned a lot of the land around here at one time. How he got it, I'm not sure, but he owned almost everything you see around here. Goes all the way out.
Okay.
See people all the way out there?
Yes.
You see some vehicles out? He owned property that went all the way out. Hundreds of acres. And he farmed all the way around here, including, we believe, portions of the cemetery. So
there was a time when people came out here to clean and they realized they were raking up bones.
Right.
Which was
all part of the farming operation.
Where Phillips had dug down into where the graves were. And they pulled them up. So.
Were there grave robbings out here too? Was there any?
Well, no. about 2 months ago, Mel and I was out here, and the sheriff came out and said that in McFarland they were robbing.
McFarland is a city on the way to Bakersfield.
Yes, it's south of here, but they were going into cemeteries and robbing graves.
Oh, wow.
So they were. Going through here, checking this one, make sure none of the graves had been disturbed. I guess they were after jewelry or whatever was on the body.
we out here. This is what we were able to do. This is what we can do when we get together, when we work together. Look at what we were able to do. Look at what we were able to do. It looks 10,000 times better than what it did earlier. This enclosure right here with Fanny Bird, you couldn't even see up in here because of all the brush that was here. Now you can see it clearly. Back here, we didn't even know there were grave sites back here. So there's a sign right here. We all in the back. We didn't even know there were sites back here. Now you can see them. Now you can see them. Same thing over here. Same thing over here. You can see the sites now. You couldn't see any of this stuff earlier. All of this stuff was covered. These are the Pierrots. These are the Pierrots. Look how clean that field look now. And now the brothers that's remaining, we had about 14, maybe 15. I think we might even had 20 brothers out here. Brothers that's remaining, what they doing is they just clearing up the sites. We'll get over there. You couldn't even see this earlier. So what they doing now is they got the hose out, and they just pulling up all of the dirt. They pulling up all of the dirt. So that way you can see that the graves are clearly marked. Most of them don't have any names on them. Most of them don't have any names on them. We have a manifest, but a lot of them don't have names on them. But what we're doing now is, we just clearing them up. So that way you can see the graves. There used to be a road right here. On the left-hand side, there was graves, and then right here on the right-hand side. And so what we're talking about right now is the possibility in the future, or trying to figure out if we can get some type of road put here. In addition to that, in the future, what we want to do is we want to have some type of fundraiser where we can get some headstones out here. You see, a lot of these grave sites, they're just marked as just a cross, just a wooden cross. But you know how weatherization is. Now look at these grave sites with the crosses compared to the ones with the actual stones. This is Charles Wells. Charles Wells. Like he was a Buffalo soldier. Says he fought in World War I. He fought in World War I. Get that thing. So this is just out of all these grave sites out here, this is maybe one of maybe 10 that actually have a cement block. Most of them just have wooden crosses. So like I said, down the line, we're gonna look at having some sort of fundraiser for them. Right here, this is where the Hackett's, James and Alice, they were some of the original pioneers that lived in the town, the Hackett's. So as the brothers are working their way down here, we're gonna get this one cleaned up as well. Let's see what else we got going on over here. And so this right here, this big pile right here, all these tumbleweeds, this was all in this field. But now we got it all cleared up.
So for those of you who are not aware, We are the Friends of Allensworth. We are a 501c3 nonprofit association. We work in partnership with California State Parks regarding Allensworth. We are actively looking for members, volunteers. We need docents. Your membership is important because it increases our revenue, and we use that money to make sure that we keep the history of this park alive and in the forefront for future generations. We are also doing a GoFundMe right now. There are many needs in the park. We are going after. We have a campground in the background here. It is right now. It is dry camping. So we want to introduce electricity and water to the camping to make it to make the experience for the camper much better than it is at the moment. We are also doing GoFundMe. We are looking to add solar panels so that we can run electricity to all of the buildings to make it more comfortable for our docents. I would like to thank you all for joining us today on our first virtual event. I would like to thank our speakers, our volunteers, and all the people who made this happen. I want to thank all of you who signed up to be members today. You will help us to move FOA as well as this park and the history of this park and the town of Allensworth and the people who lived here into the future and be preserved for future generations. Thanks again for participating. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please stay tuned for a live Zoom Q&A.